Okay, it's 12:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to just take a minute to introduce Dr. Rademaker and explain to everyone the presentation today. Dr. Rademaker has her PhD in Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She has taught online and created courses since 2008. And in 2010, she took a year-long Quality Matters course, which really helped her hone her course design skills. She has worked exclusively online since 2012 and has published articles and information on feedback and building relationships with students. She has been with ACU since 2016 and has enjoyed working with our doctoral students in the EDD program and providing feedback through multiple modalities. Her research interests include action research methodologies and the relationship between the doctoral student and their dissertation mentor. She and her writing colleague recently published their book on the intersection of evaluation and action research methodologies for practitioners in order to support just societies. Now, I have not had as much of an opportunity to get to know Dr. Rademaker since we work in different programs. So I asked a few of her colleagues in the EDD department and those who work closely with her to share a few words about her. And here are just a few that I received. Words used to describe her include dedicated, generous, and engaged. A current ACU faculty member and former EDD student said, "I had her as a professor. I believed I learned more in her class than any other." Another colleague stated, "She is one of the strongest researchers, dissertation chairs, and teachers that I know. I have learned to take joy in my students by her example. She is one of those teachers who celebrates her students' successes." And there were a lot more that I could have said today. And so thank you for all that you do for ACU and for being here to present to us today. In today's presentation, Dr. Rademaker will address how good feedback should encourage engagement with the instructor and with their peers. She will show the multiple ways she provides feedback in online courses to meet the needs of diverse learners, supported by past research. And today's presentation will be split into 3 sections. And at the end of each section, there will be opportunities to share and ask questions. So during those times, we encourage you to unmute and contribute if you'd like. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Rademaker. Thank you.
Megan, that was lovely and a little embarrassing, but you know.
There were a lot more I could have done, and I didn't do the embarrassing ones. So.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I'm really happy to do this, but I don't claim to be the expert of all feedback online. I've just been doing it a long time, and I know that as faculty, we like to share and borrow each other's ideas. We did this liberally together at another institution. I know we do it here in the EDD program, and hopefully we can do this across programs at ACU Dallas. So the preview of my presentation, gosh, and the first thing is not working. Okay, there we go. All right, so I've got 3 sections, and what I'm going to do is talk just a little bit in each section, and then I am hopeful that we can model this sharing by, I'll give you chances to unmute yourself and talk about what you do in that area. So I'm going to talk about universal design for learning, which you may or may not know about, but it's really helped. When I first learned about it, was probably about 11 years ago, and maybe 12, not sure. I'm not really good at dates, but it's really helped me understand how designing courses for everyone, people with disabilities, people with learning challenges, is good for everyone. It's not just making these changes for those with challenges, but it's good for everybody. And then the second part is that corrections and feedback should look forward. And I learned this from a former colleague who wrote several articles about this with other colleagues, and it really made sense to me that we're drawing that student forward in our feedback, and that engagement, the third part with our professors, builds that trust. And so that's kind of the research line that I've taken. And so I hope that you will go with me and engage and ask your questions or share your ideas as well. So universal design for learning, I have my notes here because I can't see them when they're up there, is a subtle principle, so you don't know what it means, UDL, that was created to help instructors create and deliver content that was accessible for all. And like I said, I first heard about it from a colleague. This colleague had learning challenges herself. She was a professor and she was on the autism spectrum. And we talked about UDL quite a bit. And when I was taking the Quality Matters course and how this can make these things accessible for all. I won't say that I'm perfect at it. I'm not perfect at it. I try, but then I really rely on my students to tell me things like when we do a synchronous meeting, for example, do I record it and make sure that Zoom does the transcription? You know, I've had students ask me about that, and that can be a small thing that takes a little bit extra time for me, but that makes things accessible for them. If you're interested in learning more about UDL, I've got a little link there. You'll get a copy of these slides later, and you can, it's a nice little document that just kind of spells everything out, but you can read more about it. You all know how to search for things. So the principles.
Are you showing, excuse me, are you showing your screen now?
Yes, I'm not. Oh, darn it. Okay, let's try this again. Am I now?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
I apologize. I was having some trouble at the beginning. It went on and off and on and off from sharing, and I guess it stayed off. Now you can see. Okay, so you will get a copy of these slides and you'll be able to check that out for yourself as well. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so for me, UDL, it means that I provide feedback in multiple ways. I provide written feedback. I meet with students. I will do video feedback. I will make sure that my expectations are clear in the feedback. So this was problematic because, but what we're looking for is this, make that really clear, and provide examples that reference familiar context. So when I do that, if it's a grammar comment, for example, which often is intertwined with content because the grammar can confuse my understanding of what the student is trying to say, I will give them a modeled sentence that shows what it is that I'm looking for, that shows how this clarifies. And so those are some of the ways that I incorporate UDL into the work that I do. And making it relevant. I think I put this picture here because relevancy for students is really important, especially adult students. It really aligns with adult andragogy if you're a student of that particular type of theoretical reference. Another thing that I do is I create large files of comments for things that I see a lot. It started with when I started using Text Expander, which is a software. There are a number of them out there, but I like Text Expander. I can create the snippet that provides resources and links and definitions, what I'm looking for, and then I can just type in a couple letters and the whole thing, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. So this is an example of one. Research questions should reveal the design population phenomenon under control, under investigation, excuse me. And then I provide them a resource, give them a link to that resource. I try to do open access stuff when I do this, and then explain what is contained in that resource. Okay, and then I use video feedback. So just a disclaimer, this is not a student paper. This was a proof in my book, and I just made a little screencast-o-matic shot to show how you can put yourself in the picture. And we have this technology in Canvas. It's called Studio, and you can go in and make a screencast-o-matic video and add it to the student's paper. I usually add it to the student's paper. I did not have luck adding it to the comment box in SpeedGrader, but I do just put the link in the student's paper. And you can go through the paper and actually point to things. Your cursor will turn yellow. So if you haven't used it, you can ask me questions, or Julie Johnson Archer is really good at this, I'm sure, and she can, a lot of people can give you feedback on that. We need a webinar on that. But it's nice because you can go through and highlight the things that are critical. You may have a lot of grammar or APA comments on the first page or two, and you want to highlight one, but you really want to get to the heart, which is the content, so you can scroll down and show the student what is most important and what you want them to take away. So I really like that. And they can see your face. So they can see that you're not angry in the red letter, red ink type of, you know, you're trying to help them move forward. And I just think that I've had students tell me that makes them feel a little less stressed from getting that type of strong feedback. Yeah, one of my colleagues wrote a book for doc students that is coming out soon. It's a handbook of all the hidden curriculum type things. And one of the chapters is about embracing ego shattering feedback, which it feels like to students, especially adults. You know, a lot of these adult students are at the top of their game. They're leaders in their field. And then you come in and rip them apart with feedback. And it's challenging. It's challenging for them to get past that, what, I'm not perfect feeling, because they're type A's, often perfectionists. And so giving that video feedback, you know, especially if my hair's messy, which it often is, you know, it just helps them, I think, see you as a real person. Of course, the synchronous meetings do that as well. And so that's just another way that you can make the feedback accessible to them. Okay, so here's the sharing time. We're at 12:12 Central Time. So what are some ways, just, you know, unmute yourself and talk about ways that you incorporate multiple means of representation into your feedback to engage the learners. You don't have to answer in the chat box, you can just say it.
I think it starts in the beginning when everyone introduced themselves. And I try to pick up on something the student said, a place they live, where I've been, or something they've done that I'm interested in. And I think that you have to start the relationship with the student in the beginning. And then you can move on to these other things.
I love that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the EDD program, and I'm sure in others, but I know that we have a targeted announcement to introduce yourself. Many of us call our students or provide a you can book me or Calendly link where they can make an appointment. And I tell them over and over again all through the course, please make that appointment, talk to me, let me get to know what you're doing. I want to hear about your project. And just that connection, it really does a lot to set them at ease and set them on that positive pathway for the course.
So one thing that I try to do is early in a course, in a screencast, include a explanation of the multiple ways in Canvas that students can view feedback that I give. So it's really easy in SpeedGrader in Canvas for me to mark up a paper or to make a comment via text or to record an audio comment or even a video. But several of those different types of feedback require the student to do different things to see the feedback. Or I can make a comment on the rubric of the assignment as well. All those require the student to click different things to find that feedback. So early on, I try to just demonstrate how they can find it. And then I guess it's just kind of up to them to hunt around for it sometimes. But without that instruction, they don't necessarily know.
That's true. That's very true. Even doc students, you know, they hunt around, and I usually in the big papers, I will download them and copy and paste the rubric into the paper because it takes longer to grade. And they will tell me there's no feedback in the SpeedGrader. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I put it in the paper, and there's a link attached to the comment where you can download your paper. But, you know, to assume that they know these things or know how to use the technology is probably incorrect.
Linnea, Amanda made a video that shows students how to view all those different kinds of feedback. Mm-hmm. And I've got it linked at the top of every one of my courses. So it's a really, I mean, it saves you time. You don't have to make an explanation video or whatever yourself. And that's been really useful. But again, I mean, the students have to be willing to click on all of those things because it does require them to actually do that.
Yes. Yes. Anything else before we move to the next section? Thank you. Thank you for giving those ideas. I really appreciate it. Oh, there's some information in the chat. I didn't see that. Kippy, can you share that link here in the chat?
Yes, I'm going to get it. I'll be right back.
Oh, yes. Julie asked about sharing about how you add closed captioning to videos and screencasts. That is complicated. It took me working with 2 people to figure out how to do that. And so that might be a good video for Amanda or your team, Julie, to make for students, for faculty, because it's not intuitive. And I had to, Peter Williams used to work here, I had to help work with him, and then another faculty member. So that's a very good question. So watch out for more information on that. Okay, so not just feedback, oops, sorry, but feed forward. What does that mean? And then synchronous meetings with learners, which we did talk about. So let's talk more about the feed forward idea. So I put this article here. It's a nice one, Marshall Goldsmith. Again, it's clickable when you get this link, but basically it's just about connecting from what they already know, where you're scaffolding from the knowledge that they know to what they need to know to provide you with the adequate explanation or information you're looking for, or meet the criteria and the rubric. And you're connecting it. You're going to need this down the road for the next assignment, for your dissertation, or whatever it is in your courses. And so feed forward makes it relevant by connecting it to their whole program. And I think that's really important. I do that a lot for doc students, because we say that our program is, everything is leading towards the dissertation. And for those of you that are not with doc students, everything in your program should be aligned with the program outcomes. So there is always something that you can connect it to in terms of what you want the students to know and be able to do when they come out of that program. So just a couple of very shallow examples, because I was thinking, I can't do this I can't share paper, so I'm just going to give you an example. If I'm correcting APA, which I tend to, in my students, they have to use APA, right? Because they're doctoral students, they're doing a dissertation. APA is a learning journey. It's not something they're going to learn in one class, one paper. I'm not going to point out every APA error, okay? That would be like the red paper marked up of death, right? They would just absolutely shut down. So I usually pick 2, 3, at most 4 issues that I see consistently in the first 2 pages. And I have a text expander snippet saying, I'm marking these APA errors to give you examples of the things that I want you to work on in this assignment and the next assignment. And, you know, if they don't do that, then they're not reading your feedback. And it's very easy to do a paper compare and to encourage them, you have to do this. This is not going to be optional for your dissertation. You really have to do it. And it's not, I call it not rocket science, although nobody likes to read the APA manual, let's get real. But you give them specifics what you're looking for. If they use passive voicing a lot, which is a common thing because we tend to talk in passive voicing, I'll give them examples. I have a big text expander snippet for that one too. I'll give them links where they can find more examples and practice doing it. So that's the supporting materials, and then set the expectations for that next assignment. If it's content, I will try to choose an area that will appear in more than one paper. And in our courses, for example, I teach qualitative research in the action research course. I teach the assessment and evaluation course, and perspective seminar, which is working on their proposal for their dissertation. There's always things that will connect to the next assignment. And so I will let them know, for instance, take theory. They have to explain a theory. They have to do quite a bit with a theory in a dissertation. But their first effort into theory is going to be pretty on the low level of defining it, maybe. And then we want to maybe have them define it from not a current author, but the original author. which is often a challenge because they will read about a theory in somebody else's book and they'll be like, oh, I like that. And so says it's this. And so you challenge them saying, I'd like you to go to the original author of this theory, who is, and I tell them, because I usually know. And I tell, if I don't, I look it up, but I will usually tell them that I expect them to go to that original author. And then I tell them why. You know, when you try to define something based upon someone else's definition, it's kind of like playing telephone. When you get too far from the original source, you're going to get a different definition. And so you tell them why, you tell them what to do, and then you explain how it's applicable to their context. You will have to do this in your dissertation. You'll have to tell how you're going to use theory to frame your study, to frame your research questions, et cetera, et cetera. And often with this one, with content questions, I will suggest and encourage strongly a synchronous meeting. Please put my link, put my booking link in the paper. And please make an appointment with me and let's talk more about this, because I think it's really important for what you're doing and you have a great idea here and I'd like to see you go further. And so give them those encouraging words that tell them that this is going to help them in the future, which it is, if you wanted to. All right, so what are some of the ways that you all do the feed forward idea? Because I don't think I have a handle on everything, but you know.
I think it's important to reiterate what you just said. Sometimes they look at these assignments that are compilations of paper at the end of the course or a capstone or whatever. They're looking at it as, I got the feedback today and that was my score and I accept it. So I think it's really important that you tell them. For instance, I was grading a paper recently and I said, you really need to pay attention to this correction because you'll need it in assignment 4. And the student wrote back and said, thank you, because I wouldn't have paid attention to it.
Yeah, very important. Very important to make those connections to the whole, not just, I mean, sometimes even in doc students, they think, well, I finished this assignment, I'll never have to do that again. And you're like, yes, you will. It's all connected. Or the course, I finished that course, it was terrible. Now I got to go on to the next course. Okay, but you're going to use that course to help you in this course. And we have some scaffolded assignments, for example, from an HRD course into the organizational evaluation assessment course that make those connections. And that's a really good point. Thank you.
Linnea?
Yes.
When I'm teaching a theory course in MFT, I will provide a link to a podcast about the theory. And usually the podcast is from the perspective of either the developer of the model or maybe a second wave theorist. So somebody that studied under the originator of the model, if they, if they're deceased. And oftentimes I'll try to connect something in the assignment directly to, minute 43 of the podcast. Like this is when the guest talks about this intervention, or this is when we really talk about contextual variables and how they apply or whatever. And so I don't know if it counts as feed forward, but as you're describing it, but my purpose is to say, here's something that can broaden what you've just learned. And I try to drop back to something specific that I was measuring in the rubric.
I definitely think that applies to feed forward, because students read a theory in a book and they don't often realize that theory comes out of research, which comes out of practice, that it's all intertwined, and that theories aren't created in a well like someone sitting in an ivory tower, although the person might be in an ivory tower, but they come out of research and practice. And so there's a circle of theory to practice, to research, to theory, to practice that keeps going, because we're theorizing about human behavior. And I absolutely think that's feed forward. And hearing the original author or someone who has used that theory talk about it makes it so much more applicable. Yeah, that's perfect, Sarah. What else? Oh.
Linnea, I appreciate this so much. I think one of the things that I keep coming into, keep experiencing, is that students don't necessarily understand, because of the, and we talk about this on the podcast all the time, but because of the history of abuse between faculty and student, they don't oftentimes understand that we're trying to help them, develop rather than providing an assessment of their performance. And so sometimes this process exposes kind of a challenge of explaining to a student what it means to try and grow rather than just to be a some kind of performance monkey that's just trying to make their professor happy.
Right.
It turns out that ends up being sometimes a deeper and more difficult conversation to have. So when you were talking about, this is my You Can Book Me link, I think that's why that becomes so valuable and important. Sometimes this happens in conversation. It's not real. It's so inductive and so opaque to the student that sometimes it's difficult for them to grab hold of.
Absolutely. And if you don't know, Scott and another former colleague and I have a podcast for doc students called Doc 101. It's in our signatures, or it's in my email signature if you want to look at it. But we talk about all of these things that are part of that hidden curriculum. We have guests on, and we try to help students unpack what it is they're doing and what they're trying to do in their doc work. And embracing feedback that's why I mentioned that about Heather Frederick's book. It's because it's so important to understand that feedback, we're trying to make it feed forward. It may not seem like that. And one of the ways you can get that feeling is to talk with us. And I think that's really important. Thanks, Scott. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so that leads to engagement, which all of this has been about engagement. Leah Fish and Jennifer Duffy, who's been an adjunct for us here in the doc program and teaches out in the East Coast in Massachusetts. She just changed universities, so don't ask me which one because I forget. But, we started this research with another colleague back in like 2015, looking at the aspect of trust. How do you build trust between a dissertation chair and the student? Because all of the research that we had in our lit review showed that element of trust was so important for the student to move forward. And so how did faculty do it? Was our first research study. How did faculty build trust? And we did a qualitative study. And then we continued that by looking at what do we do when trust breaks down. And so we had a colleague who was in experimental psych, and she said, let's use this, speaking of theory, let's use this theory that's applied to romantic relationships, romantic relationship deterioration, but we're going to overlay that theory. This is a great example for students, how we can take a theory and use it. Overlay that theory on the relationship between a doc student and their mentor, and talk about, from the mentor's perspective, how do we act when that relationship breaks down? And of course, in the romantic part of the theory, and the original authors, Russ Bolt and his colleagues, they were talking about that they were just describing the relationship can continue, they can take a break, or it can completely go away forever. And so we said, well, let's take those. There were 4 categories, and we looked at them from our perspective. Well, what we found is that the way that we continue these relationships, because we don't really have the opportunity to just walk away from a relationship. Sometimes you can, if it gets too bad, but generally we want to try to repair and keep them going. And so empathy became a big part of what we do as chairs to try to keep this relationship going. The way that we do it in our everyday work, in discussions, in assignments, in the personal context, all of these are part of that picture. And when I say discussions, everybody's like, ugh, discussion board. They just got to go in and post twice. And I try to make it more. I tell them, look, I'm going to hold you to these requirements that you have to engage across the week. We have a standard in ACU Dallas that in the online courses, you need to be in that course 5 days a week. So if you just go in once and post your thing for the discussion board, and you come back and 4 days later and you reply and say, thank you for your comment on my post, and you walk away, that's not engagement to me. And so I do call them on that. And I say, look, this could be a really valuable tool. And I say, I've done this for so many years. over the course of time, the students who utilize these discussion boards to meet their peers and have discussions about what they mean and have discussions about how other people understand their work is so important. And these students do so much better. I know that's anecdotal. It's not official statistical, but I do see an improvement. We probably should do some kind of statistical study, but anyways, so there is a lot of research on trust building, and there's another resource that I provided for you. Video feedback contributes to that relational richness. That was one of the findings in here. Video feedback makes you human and softens that perceived tone of critical feedback, even though it's still critical, but knowing that we're human. When I first started teaching online, back in 2000, I think I started in 2007 actually, but I was just asked to take this course that I'd written for action research for master's students, and they were just getting into online courses at this university, and all the faculty in my department said, you can't put these courses online. And I said, well, I'll try. And it was not good. So I just took all the things that I created in my face-to-face class and I put it online. And as you can imagine, it was kind of a disaster. I mean, the content was good, but the engagement was horrible because we don't know what we don't know. And reading the student feedback was, it was heart-wrenching. And so I thought, how can I relate to these students? And so what I did back then was I would take my little cell phone, which is not my fancy Android that I have now, but I would take my cell phone and I would record 30-second or 60-second messages and then upload those. And it made a huge difference because they could hear my voice and they could hear what my concerns were and that I wanted them to come to office. We just had office hours at that time, so we didn't have all this fancy schmancy technology. But that video and your voice, even just a phone call, makes you human, and it really does soften what it is you're trying to tell them. So for our last section, I'd like to hear more about how you build relationships with students. I think discussion boards is still my nemesis. I try to build more. Some students are just very resistant. You can't do anything about it. But tell me what you do to encourage that engagement in online discussion boards. I'm really curious.
One of the things that I've done is because I got a chance to actually develop the course that then I was teaching, is that I put in early in the weeks, one of the discussion boards was a video rather than just a post. And so they did their response in writing to somebody else, but the original post was a video, which gives them a chance to see each other's faces and hear see body language and hear the voice and all that as they're giving their post on something that was kind of an interesting one, which it seemed like that helped it a little bit. But you could also, you've got one that's already set up for, you could actually ask them to do the response in a little video. It just gives them a little bit more engagement with each other and seeing them.
I love that. I love that.
I'll add that we do that in our beginning course. Their first discussion is a video. Mm-hmm. And we have students who in my program tend to be older. A lot of them, we either have very young students or we have older students. And it causes more problems. It causes as many problems as it does open up opportunities, because so many of my students just struggle with making that video in the very first week. So even though at the top of the course with the link to how to read feedback, we also have a link to how to make a video in Canvas. It is a struggle for some of my students, and I find that they immediately become frustrated. And I don't want to start the course off that way, but I love them making a video because just like Brenda said, I think it's a great way for them to see each other, to see that everybody in this course is an actual human being. And so if anybody has some suggestions on how to overcome that, I would love to know it. Like I said, we've got the instructions for how to make a video in Canvas, but it doesn't seem to get through.
Yeah, we've had that problem in 784, which is a course that I developed, and Leah Fish helped me develop it, and she teaches it a lot. It's our qualitative and action research course, and that was the first assignment in there. The first discussion assignment was supposed a video, and I think we still have it in there, and it is a challenge for some students because either they don't get it, or they are not technically savvy, or they don't have the technology capacity, right? So that's also an issue that we have to be aware of, that not everybody has that technology capacity, either a video camera on their computer or the internet bandwidth to be able to do that. So I always encourage them in the announcement, if you have technological problems, just write out your intro, because it's just an introduction, who you are, what your problem practice might be, and what you know or don't know about qualitative research. And so write it out if you're having those problems. So I encourage them to at least participate, even in writing, if you can't do the video.
Some things that I like to do that I think helps, because I'm in teaching undergrad students who are also very hesitant and intimidated by the discussion boards because they're having to write and have their peers read them. I try to be a little bit more informal and just connect students. Like, did you see what student X said? You guys are talking about the same subject, check out her post. And I'll do like a summary, either video or something written, kind of saying, these are the things that I noticed you guys are all talking about, or let's kind of look at how this applies to your careers, and just try to really kind of just facilitate connections in the discussion boards. And I think that makes it a little bit more approachable for students who are hesitant to share in an open way.
Right. What else? Any other ideas for engagement? We have tried to do a peer feedback assignment. We started it in the problem statement class in our program, which is the capstone class before you get paired with the chair. And it's gone really well. We've had problems technologically with the one in 784, which I instituted a couple years ago. But I think that, although they are reviewing someone anonymously, they don't know who they're reviewing, and that person doesn't know them. I think looking at someone else's work, I always heard this adage when I was an undergrad and in grad school, that teaching helps you learn something. And so having the student do peer review of someone else's paper with the understanding of what they're looking for helps them see that in their own work. Oh, I forgot to put that in mine. I better put that in. And I see that sometimes, and our discussions in the doc classes are a little bit more involved, but I will see that from a student responding when someone responds to their post, and they'll say, oh, that's a really good point. I need to go back and do that. Or I saw that you mentioned that. That was really helpful for me because I didn't put that in my post. And they're learning from each other from seeing those things. And it begins in undergrad, of course, but it is harder. Absolutely. They probably need more really concise guidelines. We leave it a little more open. Just jump in.
Hello, Miss Linnea.
I was hoping you'd talk a little bit.
I just can't keep my big mouth shut. You and I have talked about this many times, but one of the things that I do, and until I came to ACU, my whole background was teaching undergrads, both in person and online. And I agree with you, Megan. Undergrad students need a lot of hand holding to break the ice and be the first one to talk. But in the doctoral program, even those folks still, they have a lot to say. And so how I get in when I want to see them engage, because sometimes they just repeat what somebody else says. I get in the discussion board, and you and I've talked about this a lot, is that I get in there and go, where are you going with this? And then another student gets in and says, well, I think she means blah, blah, blah. And pretty soon I have a whole conversation going, and that works. And that has always worked for me. I think it's just part of my personality. But, I just like to get in there. And I used to, talk with every single student, every single class, and at least give them one bit of feedback in the discussion board. But if I see that they're going off topic, or they're really not getting what the question is asking for, then I get in there and I will stir up the mud and get it going. And so that's my approach. And it's I've been teaching online since 2002, so it works. And sometimes I have to draw them back a little, once I stir the mud, but at least they're talking about the subject.
We also do, Sandra and I teach together a lot for Spectrum Seminar, and we've taught the evaluation assessment course together. We will do synchronous meetings together.
Yeah.
And so any of you who have tried to do synchronous meetings and like one student shows up, and we had that actually between us last term, but usually combining both of our sections and saying, we're going to do a combined synchronous, they're always optional. If the student doesn't feel comfortable and letting anyone else know that they're in the program, they don't have to show up. But usually when we do a combined, we'll get 5 or 6 students, sometimes more, across both of our sections, and we'll record it with their permission, and the questions that they ask, I'm sure that other students have. And so we get the chance to do this together, video feedback that is like an additional engagement for students to get more information if they were struggling with a concept.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Hey, Linnea, this isn't
True.
necessarily discussion board related, but a phenomenon that started with our beginning students a few years back was outside of class. They were creating group me's and maybe even just email chats or something, but they had their own almost commons area that they had created on their own outside
Nice.
of Canvas. And I have encouraged it. I even joke around with them and say, I like this idea, because I know they have created some really good relationships. Because if, and my joking is, I'll say, if something you don't like about me, just jump in there on the chat with each other and say, can you believe Dr. Jameson said this or did that?
Right.
And so they have some real freedom to interact with each other. And I notice it each term, where if then one reaches out to me with a question, and then they'll say, okay, I'll let everybody else know. And they'll jump in on the group me and just send it out, say, hey, I asked Dr. Jameson about this, and this is what this answer he gave. Sometimes they'll just copy and paste. So it's been really great to see that they're taking that initiative on themselves, and it again creates some good engagement. I know we've got something called Circle In that may be coming, and maybe they're using that in undergrad right now. And I've mentioned it to our students, and I'm hopeful that maybe that it could be a little bit more school sanctioned that way. But that's been
I love those kind of connections. I think they're casual, they're less stressful than the discussion board, but can help them build those relationships with each other throughout the program. And I think when we heard the presentation last month from the 3 students in the doc program, I think the Positrio, I think that's how they got together, is their connections outside of the discussion board, that they were chatting with each other. I know that was helpful to me as a grad student, especially as a mom who lives so far away from school, to have that time before and after class to talk with some of the students in the class to get to know each other. And we talked more than just about the topic at hand. We talked more than just about the content. You know, we talked about our lives, and you start to build those trusting relationships that are really important. Scott, we've talked about that on the podcast. Find your peer buddies. He's still here.
Linnea, one of the things, going back to what you just said about that, I forget now what class we were in, but I had a student, two students, both of them lived in the same city. And the one girl was just devastated. You know, her mom had just passed and just a lot of things was going on in her life. And she goes, I just need a friend. And I said, well, you know, I said, it might not be a bad idea for you to reach out to some of your peers and see where they live. Well, these two girls hooked up somehow, and they lived in the same city, and they became lifelong friends because they emailed me several classes later and said, oh, thank you for making that suggestion that I reach out. And you know, if you've gone to school online and you know the isolation you feel, I got my doctoral program was online, and I did get the feeling isolated because my friend that I had made in my cohort lived in Atlanta. I live in Sacramento, so we're on different coasts, but yet we FaceTimed every day and or talked every day. And so I think it's okay for us to suggest that they reach out to some of their colleagues in class. I don't see anything wrong with that. And then they can disclose, oh yeah, well, I just live down the street from you or whatever, you know. So I don't think it hurts to give them a push in that direction.
I think we're coming up 10 minutes before the hour. And Dina or Megan, is there anything else that you wanted to remind people of, the next presentation or anything? Or?
Well, absolutely. I want to thank you, Dr. Rademaker, just from sharing your perspective and giving us kind of the ideas to start with, to kind of start thinking about it. You can hear from people's comments, then they're thinking about the different things that they do. And I'm definitely going to take the ideas about, you know, kind of stepping into the discussion boards and giving little things that will encourage the students to kind of give back to each other on and get more of the conversation going. Because I feel like that's one of the ways that we can build relationships with them, but also kind of see them interact with each other better. And it's sometimes is awkward at the beginning, but I'm looking forward to doing better at that with the undergraduate students that I work with. So just want to thank everybody for coming today and getting some good information on feedback we can get to make a better experience for all of our students in all the programs. As we move forward, I want you to remind you that next month on March 10th, we're going to have our next FDI event, and it's going to be about applying for promotion. So want to give you guys some good information from Dr. Nanette Glenn and Dr. Heather Rasmussen, just to give you some information about applying. And please encourage all of your adjuncts to come as well, though that might not apply to them here, but the information they're going to get will be able to be applied at any of the other universities or other places that they're teaching. So hopefully it will be good information for us and for all those who are also faculty, adjunct faculty for us. So thank you so much for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.